The interrogation room at Fort Mason smelled of salt air and disinfectant, a stark concrete box overlooking San Francisco Bay, where merchant ships moved like toys across grey water. General Hideki Yamashiro sat rigidly in a metal chair, his uniform stripped of insignia, hands folded on a table scarred by cigarette burns and carved initials. At 63, his face bore the deep lines of a man who had spent decades calculating impossible equations: how to feed armies on diminishing supplies, how to squeeze one more month of combat from starving soldiers, how to convince civilians that their sacrifice built national strength. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Across from him, Captain James Whitmore spread photographs like a poker player revealing a winning hand. The American officer moved with deliberate casualness, his Midwestern accent carrying none of the triumph Yamashiro expected from victors. Whitmore had the weathered look of a man who'd worked with his hands before the uniform, thick fingers handling the glossy prints with surprising care. "Just thought you might find these interesting, General," Whitmore said, sliding the first photograph forward. Yamashiro looked down at an impossibility. The image showed what the Americans claimed was a civilian grocery store. Shelves stretched toward a vanishing point, stacked floor to ceiling, with canned goods in neat, identical rows. The abundance was obscene. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of identical tins, organized with military precision, but available allegedly to ordinary citizens. The lighting was too perfect, the arrangement too theatrical. Obviously a film set, or perhaps a military warehouse photographed to deceive. "Hollywood," Yamashiro said in careful English, his voice carrying the contempt of a man who'd seen propaganda before. He'd designed rationing systems for the entire Kanto region, calculated rice distribution grain by grain. He knew exactly how much food a nation could produce, how thinly it must be spread, to feed both military and civilian populations. This photograph violated every logistical reality he'd spent his career mastering. Whitmore's expression didn't change. He slid another photograph across the table. This one showed produce, mountains of it. Apples stacked in perfect pyramids, oranges glowing under fluorescent lights, vegetables in varieties and quantities that made Yamashiro's chest tighten. He remembered children's faces in Tokyo, hollow-cheeked and silent, receiving 2 small sweet potatoes as their weekly vegetable ration. He remembered mothers bowing in gratitude for handfuls of daikon radish, their hands trembling as they calculated how to stretch it across 7 days. "You have talented set designers," Yamashiro said, but his voice sounded thin even to himself. A third photograph. Meat counters stretching 30 feet, refrigerated cases filled with beef, pork, chicken. Guts he recognized from officers' mess halls, displayed here as if available to anyone with currency. The waste implicit in such display, the refrigeration costs alone, the transportation infrastructure required, it was logistically insane. No rational economy would deploy such resources for civilian food distribution. "The American people have access to this?" Yamashiro asked, unable to suppress the question. "Every day," Whitmore replied. "Multiple stores per neighborhood. Competition keeps prices down, competition." The word itself revealed the deception. Yamashiro had studied American economics, understood their chaotic capitalist system with its inefficiencies and duplication of effort. Central planning was superior. Every textbook, every military strategist, every economic analysis confirmed it. Individual choice was wasteful luxury, squandering resources that coordinated distribution could allocate efficiently. Through the walls, Yamashiro could hear raised voices from the adjacent interrogation room. Major General Saburo Ishida, predictably, was not taking the photographs quietly. Decadence. Ishida's voice carried through concrete. Moral weakness. The Bushido Code teaches that strength comes from discipline, from sacrifice. This abundance you show, if it existed, would breed soft citizens incapable of enduring hardship. Yamashiro felt a flash of irritation at Ishida's volume. his lack of tactical restraint. The man had been a true believer all his life. 12 generations of family service to the emperor, creating an ideology as inflexible as steel. But Ishida was voicing what Yamashiro himself believed, what every principle of their military culture affirmed: sacrifice built character. Scarcity created strength. Abundance corrupted discipline. In the third interrogation room, Colonel Takeshi Nomura sat in silence. Yamashiro knew Nomura's background: Tokyo Imperial University, economics degree before military service. Younger, more adaptable, educated in Western analytical methods. Through the thin walls, Yamashiro heard nothing from Nomura's room, which was somehow more unsettling than Ishida's shouting. Whitmore gathered the photographs methodically, tapping them into alignment against the table. I understand skepticism, General. These images challenge assumptions, but I'm authorized to arrange a field observation if you're interested. Let you see one of these stores yourself. Yamashiro felt his pulse quicken. The American was calling his bluff, confident enough in the deception to invite direct inspection. It was a clever tactic. The prisoner would visit an elaborate stage set, would be shown a temporary installation designed to demoralize, would return to his cell with carefully curated false memories. I accept, Yamashiro said immediately. Let the Americans waste resources on their theatrical production. When he exposed it as fabrication, when he demonstrated the logical impossibilities of such abundance, perhaps they would understand that Japanese officers were not so easily deceived. The door opened and a young soldier entered. Lieutenant Kenji Watanabe wore the uniform of the U.S. Army, but carried himself with posture Yamashiro recognized: Japanese training underlying American service. The translator's face remained carefully neutral, professional courtesy concealing whatever he thought of this exchange. Lieutenant Watanabe will accompany us, Whitmore said. Born in California, speaks perfect Japanese. He'll translate anything you need explained. Yamashiro studied the young man's face. Watanabe had grown up in America, which meant he'd grown up with American grocery stores, if such things actually existed as portrayed. But the translator's expression revealed nothing. No smugness, no anticipation of watching a superior officer's worldview shatter. Instead, something that looked almost like sadness flickered in his eyes. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tomorrow morning, Whitmore said, standing. 0900. Dress comfortably. It's a civilian environment. After the Americans left, Yamashiro sat alone in the interrogation room, watching fog roll across the bay. His hands trembled slightly, from cold, he told himself, though the room was adequately heated. Tomorrow he would expose American deception, would prove that his career, his calculations, his carefully administered scarcity had been necessary and correct. But the trembling in his hands suggested that some part of him, some analytical corner of his mind that had spent decades calculating logistics, had already begun performing different calculations he didn't want to complete. In his mind, unbidden, came the memory of a civilian rationing committee meeting in 1944. A mother had asked why children couldn't receive more protein, more vegetables, more nutrition for growing bodies. Yamashiro had explained patiently and with conviction that sacrifice built character, that the children would be stronger for having endured hardship, that abundance bred weakness, scarcity bred strength. The mother had bowed and accepted his wisdom. 6 months later, he'd learned her youngest son had died of malnutrition-related illness. Yamashiro pushed the memory away, but it clung like smoke. Tomorrow, he would prove the photographs were lies. He had to. The alternative, that such abundance was real, that American children grew up with full bellies and multiple choices, that civilian prosperity rather than sacrifice created national strength, was too terrible to contemplate. Because if that were true, then every decision he'd made, every rationing system he'd designed, every family he'd told to sacrifice more, had been not just a mistake, but a fundamental misunderstanding of how nations created power. He stood, legs stiff from sitting, and walked to the window. Across the bay, San Francisco's lights were coming on, thousands upon thousands of them. Electricity flowing with casual abundance that suggested infrastructure he'd never been able to build for Tokyo's military installations. Tomorrow, he told himself again. Tomorrow he would expose the deception, but his hands kept trembling. The California morning shone with almost cruel brightness as Yamashiro was escorted to an unmarked army truck. Sergeant Harold Washington, a composed African-American NCO, greeted him and the other Japanese officers, Nomura and Ishida. They boarded the truck with Lieutenant Watanabe, a Japanese-American interpreter whose dual identity unsettled Yamashiro. As the truck rolled through San Francisco's working-class suburbs, Yamashiro's trained mind began calculating what he saw. Rows of modest houses, each with one or more automobiles. Japan had struggled to produce enough trucks for war, yet here, ordinary laborers owned cars. The realization struck him harder than any lecture. When Washington mentioned his factory worker mother owned a Chevrolet, Yamashiro felt his logic falter. Passing children played in sunlit yards, healthy and well-fed, so unlike the hollow-eyed children of Tokyo. Even garbage revealed abundance. Discarded bread, vegetables, food beyond imagining for rationed Japan. Nomura questioned if the route was staged. Washington calmly replied that his own neighborhood was the same. They passed grocery stores, restaurants offering multiple meal choices, and Washington casually spoke of studying for a degree under the GI Bill. Each observation chipped away at Yamashiro's beliefs until the truck stopped before Chen's supermarket, a monument to civilian abundance. He trembled, realizing that this prosperity was not propaganda. It was truth. The parking lot stretched before them like a concrete sea, hundreds of cars gleaming under the sun. Yamashiro froze, overwhelmed by its scale. 450 parking spaces, most filled, all for a single grocery store. His logistics-trained mind spun at the implications. Thousands of households supplied weekly, a supply chain vast beyond comprehension. A woman unloaded groceries into her car. A young American soldier, Private Rizzo, cheerfully helped another woman with her bags before returning inside. No hierarchy, no formal duty, just casual kindness. Whitmore explained that Rizzo worked part-time while attending community college, saving to open his own store. The notion of a private soldier aspiring to business ownership felt impossible. As they approached the glass doors, they slid open automatically. Yamashiro stared, electric sensors for a grocery store. Watanabe explained it was standard convenience, not luxury. Ishida called it theater, but his trembling voice betrayed disbelief. Nomura, pale, crossed first. Through the glass, Yamashiro saw a Chinese-American woman managing operations, workers moving efficiently, families shopping freely. Watanabe quietly told him, "It's real, sir. All of it." Yamashiro stepped forward. The doors parted again, cold air washing over him, refrigerated, conditioned, controlled. The ordinary miracle of American abundance awaited inside. The produce section struck Yamashiro like a shockwave of color and abundance. Rows of apples, red, green, yellow, filled pyramids that could feed battalions. Oranges, bananas, lettuce, and tomatoes stretched endlessly under fluorescent light, each piece perfect, cold, real. Fresh vegetables in January, unthinkable in Japan's rationed cities. His mind raced through calculations. Farms in multiple climates, refrigerated transport, electrical grids, distribution systems, an infrastructure beyond anything he'd ever commanded. Margaret Chen, the store manager, greeted him politely, clipboard in hand. "We replace most produce every 3 to 4 days," she said. "Twice daily deliveries, constant freshness." Dr. Morgan, a nutrition researcher, added that Americans consumed 7 to 9 fruits and vegetables weekly. Yamashiro remembered Tokyo children rationed to 2 sweet potatoes and felt something twist inside. Nearby, Private Rizzo moved pallets of lettuce with a forklift, handling in minutes what once took entire work crews. Spoilage, Chen explained, was about 8%, waste that exceeded Japan's total city rations. A little girl compared apples, choosing by sweetness. "Your choice," her mother said. That phrase, so casual, so foreign, shattered him. Choice as ordinary expectation, not indulgence. "Other stores like this?" he asked. 3 nearby, Chen replied. Competition ensured abundance. Yamashiro touched an apple, trembling. The world he'd believed in was gone. The refrigerated meat aisles struck Yamashiro like a physical blow. 30 feet of glass, displaying abundance he had believed impossible. Beef came first. Thick T-bone steaks, marbled roasts, and ground meat sold by the pound at prices a factory worker could easily afford. Pork followed, chops, ribs, bacon, and sausages in countless varieties. Chicken filled another case, separated by parts so consumers could choose at will. Lamb, turkey, and duck completed the display. Every piece was fresh, chilled, and available to ordinary citizens. Yamashiro's mind reeled. His soldiers had survived on a fraction of this, half a pound of protein a month. He'd told them scarcity built character. Beside him, General Ishida began laughing, then weeping, clutching a package of steak as if it might vanish. "It's real," he whispered, his entire belief system collapsing in public view. A store manager explained calmly, "Average families bought 4 to 5 pounds of meat weekly." Dr. Morgan added that American children consumed 15 to 20 grams of protein daily. Yamashiro realized their physical strength came not from genetics, but from nutrition. He sank onto a bench, staring at the glowing aisles. Everything he'd believed about sacrifice, efficiency, and national strength had been a lie. The center aisles stretched like corridors in a fever dream. Each dedicated to abundance, Yamashiro couldn't process rationally anymore. His analytical mind, trained in logistics optimization, now catalogued evidence of his own obsolescence. Breakfast cereals occupied an entire aisle. Yamashiro stopped counting at 37 varieties, different grains, sugar contents, marketing appeals to children versus adults. Cornflakes beside Frosted Flakes, beside Raisin Bran, beside products he'd never heard of. Individual preference, accommodated through industrial diversity. Market competition, creating options that central planning would dismiss as wasteful duplication. Campbell's soup, Watanabe translated labels at Yamashiro's request. Chicken noodle, tomato, vegetable beef, cream of mushroom, cream of celery, split pea minestrone, clam chowder. 16 varieties. 16 different soups, available simultaneously, chosen by individual taste rather than centralized allocation. The philosophical implications staggered him more than the produce section's physical abundance. He designed rationing systems based on assumptions that central planning was superior, that uniform distribution maximized efficiency, that individual choice was wasteful luxury, consuming resources better, allocated through expert analysis. Yet here stood proof that market-serving individual preference produced greater abundance than authoritarian efficiency ever achieved. Nomura stood frozen before the cereal aisle, his economics degree confronting reality that contradicted his training. "The agricultural surplus required," he murmured, "the industrial capacity for packaging, the distribution infrastructure coordinating thousands of products. It shouldn't be possible without central coordination, but it was possible. It was happening. Store shelves stocked through decentralized market mechanisms, supply meeting demand through price signals rather than bureaucratic mandates. Abundance created through competition rather than sacrifice. Dr. Morgan explained market dynamics with academic precision. Competition drives innovation and cost reduction. Companies improve products to attract customers, reduce prices to gain market share, respond to consumer preferences to maintain relevance. Self-interest, channeled through competitive markets, creates abundance more effectively than coordinated planning demanding sacrifice. The capitalist principles they'd been taught were decadent weaknesses: individual self-interest, profit motive, competitive duplication were revealed as engines of superior production. Rizzo restocked shelves nearby, whistling cheerfully, moving cases with practiced efficiency. "Night school's going well," he mentioned casually to a co-worker. "Business management course is tough, but I'm learning inventory systems, accounting principles. Figure I'll need it when I open my own store," his own store. A private first class, planning independent business ownership through education and saved wages, discussing it casually while performing manual labor. His upward mobility assumed, rather than questioned. In Japanese military culture, such class fluidity was impossible. Your birth determined your ceiling, your rank defined your future, your assigned role was your destiny. The idea that a working-class soldier could study business and become an owner contradicted fundamental social assumptions. Chen discussed inventory management with Nomura, explaining computer-assisted ordering systems, supply chain optimization through data analysis, efficiency achieved through technological sophistication rather than human sacrifice. We track sales patterns, predict demand fluctuations, adjust orders automatically. The system minimizes waste while ensuring availability, technological sophistication. Not brute resources, but systematic efficiency that exceeded anything Yamashiro had managed through careful calculations and human discipline. Washington mentioned shopping here himself. His normal purchases, the unremarkable nature of choosing between brands based on price and preference. An African-American sergeant facing discrimination in broader society, still accessing abundance that Japanese generals had never imagined. The contradiction complicated simple narratives about American perfection. The system produced abundance while containing injustice, yet still outperformed authoritarian alternatives that promised equality through shared scarcity. Yamashiro experienced another memory, sharp and accusatory, explaining to a civilian committee why uniform rice rations were necessary, claiming choice was wasteful luxury, insisting central planning was logically superior to market chaos. The committee had accepted his expertise. They distributed identical rations to diverse families with different needs, had suppressed individual preferences for collective efficiency, had trusted his calculations over their own judgment. And they'd starved quietly, disciplined and grateful, while American families chose between 37 cereal varieties. "The dairy section," Chen said, gesturing toward refrigerated cases visible ahead, "demonstrates our cold chain infrastructure." Yamashiro nodded, no longer surprised that each new section would deepen his transformation, no longer hoping for evidence of deception, simply following numbly toward the next revelation that would further demolish his worldview. The refrigerated dairy section glowed like an altar to technological infrastructure. 20 feet of glass-fronted cases maintaining precise temperatures, through continuous electrical power that Yamashiro had never achieved even for critical military supplies. Milk occupied the first section, gallons, half-gallons, quarts, pints. Whole milk 2%, 1% skim. Different fat contents for different dietary preferences and health needs, all fresh, all refrigerated, all simultaneously available. Multiple brands competing on quality and price, choice layered upon choice, cheese varieties from around the world filled adjacent cases. Cheddar, Swiss, American, Monterey Jack, mozzarella, provolone, Gouda, Brie, names Yamashiro recognized from pre-war imports that only wealthy elite could access. Here, ordinary citizens selected imported European cheeses based on dinner preferences rather than special occasion justification. Yogurt in flavors, butter readily accessible, cream for coffee, cottage cheese. Sour cream, dairy products that required uninterrupted refrigeration from production through consumption. Every point in the supply chain maintaining cold temperatures through technological systems functioning with assumed reliability. "How often do you experience power outages?" Nomura asked Chen, his scientific training focusing on infrastructure vulnerability. "Maybe once or twice annually, usually weather-related," Chen replied, consulting maintenance logs. We have backup generators that activate automatically, maintain refrigeration during outages. Lost power for 6 hours last winter during a storm. Backup systems kept everything cold, no inventory loss. Backup generators. Redundant systems preventing single-point failures. Technological sophistication deployed to protect civilian food supplies with reliability. The Japanese military logistics never achieved even for critical medicine and ammunition. Yamashiro remembered attempting to organize refrigerated transport for military medical supplies. Watching the effort fail due to unreliable electrical infrastructure, inadequate backup systems, technological limitations that condemned wounded soldiers to inferior care. American civilians received better cold chain infrastructure for their milk than Japanese soldiers received. For their medical supplies, the frozen food section extended the technological revelation, an entire aisle of products preserved at sub-zero temperatures, maintained through continuous freezing from processing plant through store to home freezer. Frozen vegetables at harvest peak nutrition. Frozen meals for convenience. Ice cream in flavors that suggested frivolous abundance. Most American families own refrigerators and freezers, Watanabe explained, noticing Yamashiro's fixation on the frozen section. Home appliances that maintain cold storage, extend food preservation, allow bulk purchasing and meal planning. Most families, not just wealthy elite, not just officers, but ordinary working-class households possessing electrical appliances that required reliable power grids, continuous service, technological infrastructure deployed universally across civilian populations. Rizzo mentioned his family's garage freezer casually, secondary frozen storage in private homes, backup capacity exceeding primary refrigeration, abundance of abundance. Washington described his mother's frozen convenience meals, allowing her to work full-time while maintaining family nutrition. She keeps a week's worth of dinners frozen, pulls them out as needed, saves time, reduces waste, makes working outside the home manageable. Working mother, full-time employment, frozen meals for convenience. Each detail revealed social complexity that rigid hierarchical systems couldn't accommodate. American society allowed women's workforce participation, supported it through technological convenience, created flexibility that Japanese culture's strict gender roles prevented. Morgan explained health implications with scientific precision. Refrigeration revolutionized food safety, reduced foodborne illness dramatically, extended nutritional availability across seasons, democratized access to diverse diets, regardless of local growing conditions or harvest timing. The American system didn't just produce more abundance, it built infrastructure making that abundance sustainable. Universally accessible, technologically sophisticated, beyond anything authoritarian efficiency achieved through sacrifice. Yamashiro calculated silently the electrical grid capacity alone, powering refrigeration in thousands of stores and millions of homes continuously, exceeded Japan's entire electrical infrastructure that he'd struggled to maintain for military operations. Your power plants, he asked Whitmore directly. How much electrical generation capacity does America possess? Whitmore consulted notes, provided figures that Yamashiro couldn't fully process. Generating capacity measured in gigawatts, distribution networks spanning continental distances, reliability metrics that Japanese military installations never approached. The technological superiority wasn't battlefield weapons or military equipment. It was civilian infrastructure, electrical grids and refrigeration chains and transportation networks, systems built to serve ordinary people's daily needs, creating surplus capacity that military applications drew upon, rather than requiring military prioritization, depleting civilian welfare. Democratic capitalism's strength came from serving citizens first, letting military power emerge from civilian abundance rather than demanding civilian sacrifice to build military strength. Yamashiro felt the last intellectual defenses crumbling. This wasn't about producing more food. It was about systemic superiority, technological sophistication, infrastructure investment, distributed capacity, reliable systems functioning continuously without heroic human effort. Everything he'd believed about efficiency through sacrifice, about strength through scarcity, about authoritarian planning's superiority, all of it was wrong. Comprehensively, fundamentally, irredeemably wrong. The checkout area provided the final philosophical devastation, not through displays of abundance, but through watching ordinary Americans purchase and consume it as unremarkable. Routine, a working mother with 3 children filled her cart, with food representing more nutrition than a Japanese family received monthly. Ground beef, fresh vegetables, milk, bread, cereal, canned goods, a week's groceries for 5 people. She paid with cash from her factory wages, the transaction routine and unremarkable. Yamashiro watched her check prices, calculate totals mentally, make decisions balancing nutrition and budget. Individual agency, informed choice, personal responsibility. The system trusted ordinary citizens to make family decisions rather than requiring central allocation by experts. An elderly man purchased steaks and fresh vegetables on a modest pension, his retirement income sufficient for quality protein and diverse nutrition. The system supported non-productive elderly with dignity rather than requiring families to absorb all elder care. A young couple debated cereal brands, laughing about nutritional values versus taste preferences. Their casual disagreement, their good-natured negotiation, their assumption that choice deserved discussion. It revealed democracy's foundation in individual agency. What destroyed Yamashiro's remaining defenses wasn't the abundance anymore, but realizing the system served everyone. American strength came from elevating ordinary citizens rather than demanding their sacrifice. He'd believed military discipline and civilian sacrifice created national power. But watching these unremarkable Americans purchase food casually revealed the opposite. Systems organized around civilian prosperity create surplus that includes military strength as byproduct, rather than requiring military strength through civilian deprivation. Nomura watched. Chen managed checkout operations, directing staff, resolving pricing disputes, exercising authority earned through competence rather than rank or family lineage. A Chinese-American woman succeeded in a system rewarding performance over hierarchy, merit over birth. Watanabe translated cashier conversations, weekend plans, university classes, dating prospects. Even low-ranking workers had futures, educations, personal lives continuing beyond labor. They weren't resources to be allocated, but individuals pursuing self-determined goals. Rizzo finished his shift, waved goodbye to co-workers, headed toward community college classes with casual confidence in his upward mobility. His trajectory from private first class to store clerk, to night student to future business owner represented fluidity impossible in rigid hierarchical systems. Whitmore explained, average. American income levels quietly, purchasing power statistics, cost of groceries relative to wages. The numbers revealed that working-class families could afford diverse nutrition, that economic systems produced broadly distributed prosperity rather than concentrating wealth while demanding sacrifice from masses. Yamashiro watched customers load automobiles, realized this entire system repeated daily across the nation. Thousands of stores, millions of families. Continuous abundance created and consumed and replenished through decentralized mechanisms that authoritarian planning couldn't match. Nomura asked the forbidden question aloud. Did we ever have any chance of winning this war? The silence that followed held terrible recognition. Japan had fought an opponent with 10 times its effective power, not just military capacity, but systemic superiority. Economic abundance, technological infrastructure, civilian prosperity creating surplus that military strength drew upon. The war's outcome was predetermined by systems, not battlefield tactics. Japanese sacrifice and discipline couldn't overcome American abundance and efficiency. Individual heroism couldn't defeat systemic superiority. Yamashiro's transformation completed its intellectual phase. He understood now that Japanese militarism wasn't just defeated, but fundamentally inferior as a system. The sacrifice he'd imposed wasn't building strength. It was ensuring weakness. Democratic systems, empowering ordinary citizens, create stronger nations than authoritarian systems demanding sacrifice. Individual choice, distributed power, competitive markets, civilian welfare. These weren't weaknesses, but sources of national strength. The checkout line moved steadily. Customers purchasing food, cashiers processing transactions. The system functioning smoothly through routine operations rather than heroic effort. Efficiency through systems rather than sacrifice. Strength through abundance rather than scarcity. Yamashiro stood quietly, watching American democracy function through supermarket operations, understanding that he'd spent his career serving an ideology that was comprehensively wrong about how nations create power. The detention facility's common room had never hosted a voluntary gathering before. Guards watched with surprise as Yamashiro, Nomura, and even Broken Ishida requested group meeting space. The former adversaries seeking collective processing of shared trauma. Yamashiro spoke first, his voice steady but hollow. I designed rationing systems that starved civilians while believing it built national strength. The American system proves civilian welfare creates strength. I sentenced children to malnutrition while claiming sacrifice defined character. I was wrong, comprehensively, fundamentally wrong. The confession hung in air, thick with cigarette smoke and regret. Nomura contributed economic analysis, his training providing intellectual framework for moral reckoning. American GDP per capita exceeds ours by factor of 8 to 10. Industrial production capacity, agricultural output, technological infrastructure. Every metric reveals we fought an opponent whose effective power dwarfed ours. The war's outcome was predetermined by systemic differences, not battlefield courage or tactical brilliance. Numbers that damned decades of military strategy that revealed Japanese sacrifice as futile rather than noble. Ishida, broken and quiet, asked the question haunting all of them. If we'd known the truth about American abundance, could we have counseled against war? Would our military culture have permitted questioning official propaganda? The silence suggested the answer. Their system had demanded unquestioning loyalty, had suppressed evidence contradicting ideology, had made honest assessment impossible, even for high-ranking officers. Watanabe observed from the corner, translating quietly for Whitmore, who sat witness to transformation he'd guided. The young translator's expression held sadness rather than triumph. He understood the psychological cost of watching one's worldview shatter. Dr. Morgan's research notes documented the process clinically. When ideology breaks, individuals must either reconstruct worldviews or collapse into madness. The generals chose reconstruction, painful as it was. They discussed upcoming war crimes trials with new perspective, judgment they now partly accepted. Yamashiro's rationing policies had caused suffering, not through malice, but through serving a fundamentally flawed system. That didn't excuse consequences, but it contextualized them differently. I will testify honestly, Yamashiro said. Will acknowledge my role in administering scarcity that wasn't necessary for national strength, but resulted from systemic inferiority. Will bear witness to how authoritarian ideology prevented recognizing superior alternatives, Nomura agreed. Ishida, through tears, nodded acceptance. Yamashiro began writing a letter to his deceased son's mother, attempting to explain his transformation. The words came slowly, inadequately, but he continued, explaining how supermarket abundance had revealed that the sacrifices he demanded weren't building strength, but ensuring weakness, that the system they'd served was fundamentally inferior to democratic capitalism's civilian-focused prosperity. The common room grew quiet, except for Yamashiro's pen scratching paper, guards changing shifts beyond the door, San Francisco's foghorns calling across the bay. "We request permission to return to the supermarket next week," Yamashiro told Whitmore. "Not as prisoners viewing propaganda, but as students seeking to understand systems we'll need to help rebuild Japan." Whitmore nodded approval, understanding that transformation required time to deepen. That intellectual recognition must become emotional acceptance before generating constructive action. The generals sat together until dawn, no longer defending ideology, but grieving its loss. No longer adversaries, but men confronting shared failure. No longer certain of anything, except that everything they'd believed about creating national power was wrong. Outside, American abundance continued its routine cycles. Stores restocking, families shopping, systems functioning through decentralized efficiency that authoritarian planning couldn't match. And inside, 3 Japanese generals began the painful work of reconstructing worldviews from the rubble of shattered certainties. The second supermarket visit felt entirely different from the first. Yamashiro carried a notebook, his questions systematic rather than defensive, his posture that of a student rather than a prisoner skeptical of deception. Chen welcomed them professionally, fielding detailed inquiries about supply chain logistics, inventory management systems, employee training protocols, pricing strategies, balancing profit with competition. Yamashiro took notes methodically, his logistics expertise now analyzing systems he'd previously dismissed. Nomura engaged. Chen, in extended discussion about market economics, how competing supermarkets drove innovation without central coordination, how price signals communicated supply and demand more efficiently than bureaucratic allocation, how consumer choice created feedback mechanisms that authoritarian planning couldn't match. Morgan explained public health nutrition programs, school lunch systems that ensured children received balanced meals regardless of family income, government interventions that supported market systems while protecting vulnerable populations. Rizzo described GI Bill benefits enthusiastically, tuition coverage, housing stipends, small business loans supporting veterans' transition to civilian success. His casual plans for independent business ownership represented social mobility that rigid hierarchies prevented. Washington discussed the contradiction he embodied facing, discrimination in segregated society while accessing abundance that Japanese generals never imagined. "Systems not perfect," he said quietly, "still fighting for full equality, but even with injustice, it produces better outcomes than systems demanding sacrifice from everyone equally." Yamashiro watched a mother teaching her young daughter to read nutrition labels, choosing between products based on family preferences and health considerations. Individual citizens making informed choices, educated populace participating in market decisions, distributed decision-making, trusting ordinary people's judgment. This simple domestic scene represented everything Japanese militarism failed to achieve. Educated civilians, empowered families, trust in individual agency rather than central authority. The bakery section triggered Yamashiro's final transformation. Fresh bread in dozens of varieties, white, wheat, rye, sourdough, specialty loaves stacked in abundance, baked daily, available to everyone. He remembered sawdust mixed into Japanese wartime bread, necessity born from scarcity he'd administered with pride. Here bread came in varieties chosen by taste preference, fresh daily, universally accessible. Yamashiro purchased a simple wheat loaf, his first autonomous consumer choice in years. The transaction felt revolutionary, selecting product based on preference, exchanging currency for chosen goods, participating in market economy as equal agent rather than receiving allocated rations. Walking out, carrying bread he'd chosen and purchased, Yamashiro understood democratic capitalism's deepest power. It treated people as capable decision-makers rather than resources to be allocated by superior authority. We'll help rebuild Japan, he told Whitmore outside. We'll advocate for democratic constitution, market economy, systems prioritizing civilian prosperity as foundation for national power. The lesson America taught through supermarket aisles rather than battlefield. Victory. Whitmore's expression held respect for transformation achieved through confronting uncomfortable truth rather than maintaining comfortable certainty. That night, Yamashiro began writing testimony for his war crimes trial, not defending his actions, but explaining his transformation. I believed sacrifice created strength. I was wrong. I will spend my remaining years helping build a Japan where children eat bread without sawdust, where mothers choose vegetables for their families, where ordinary citizens' prosperity creates true national power. This is the lesson America taught me, not through battlefield victory, but through supermarket aisles. The words felt inadequate to capture complete ideological collapse and painful reconstruction, but they represented truth, however devastating, accepted and embraced as foundation for better future. Outside his cell window, San Francisco's lights glowed with casual electrical abundance. Inside, a former general who'd administered scarcity, with pride, now understood that abundance through democratic systems created strength that sacrifice through authoritarianism could never match. The transformation was complete. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.